April 16th, 1947, 8:15 in the morning. Texas City, Texas. A small fire breaks out in the hold of a cargo ship docked at the pier. Dock workers notice smoke. The ship's crew tries to fight it. Word spreads along the waterfront. People gather to watch from the pier and the surrounding area. The local fire department is called. Firemen arrive and begin working the scene. They have no idea what is in that hold. At 9:12, the SS Grandcamp detonates 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate, all at once in the middle of an active port. The explosion is felt 200 miles away. It sends a 40-foot wave across the harbor. It kills every single firefighter who responded to the scene, every one of them. And when the lawsuits finally reach the United States Supreme Court, 6 justices decide that not a single person, not one company, not one government agency is legally liable for any of it. The ammonium nitrate on that ship was not a mystery cargo. It was a known quantity. The federal government had manufactured it during World War II. Hundreds of thousands of tons of it. The war ended. Nobody knew quite what to do with all of it. So it was repackaged as fertilizer and sold to export markets. The problem was the packaging. The ammonium nitrate had been bagged in paper sacks coated with a highly flammable wax. Somewhere in the hold of the Grandcamp, something ignited one of those sacks. The heat reached the fertilizer. The fertilizer reached itself. The United States government manufactured the cargo. The government approved its packaging and export. The government agency responsible for maritime safety had classified ammonium nitrate as a non-explosive material just 2 years earlier. When the lawsuits came, the government successfully argued it could not be sued. 3 things about Texas City that explain how 581 people can die and no one faces any consequence. The first, 16 hours after the Grandcamp exploded, a second ship in the harbor also detonated. The SS Highflyer was also carrying ammonium nitrate. It had caught fire from the first explosion. Crews worked through the night trying to tow it out of the harbor before it could go up. They failed. The second explosion killed additional workers and destroyed what remained of the dock area infrastructure that had survived the first blast. The second, the International News Service wire photo of the disaster, showing a mushroom cloud rising over Texas City that looked disturbingly similar to atomic bomb test footage, was one of the most widely distributed news images of 1947. For a brief moment, there was genuine fear in parts of the country that the explosion had been deliberate. The image ran on front pages across America. The story ran for days, and then it stopped, without any formal accountability ever materializing. The third, the families of the dead filed a class action lawsuit against the United States government, one of the largest tort cases in American history at that point. They eventually won a lower court decision. The government appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1953, in a 6-3 ruling, the court held that the government was protected from liability under the Federal Tort Claims Act. The majority decision explicitly acknowledged the tragedy of the outcome. It upheld it anyway. The morning of April 16th had begun ordinarily. Dock workers were at their stations. Ships were loading and unloading across the busy port. The Grandcamp had been in port for several days and was in the final stages of taking on cargo. The ammonium nitrate had been loaded in the previous days, bagged and stowed in the forward hold. Above it, on the deck, other cargo was being positioned. It was a working port morning, busy, routine, unremarkable. Texas City in 1947 was a thriving port town on Galveston Bay, one of the most active chemical and petroleum handling facilities on the Gulf Coast. The port processed a heavy traffic of export cargo, including the surplus ammonium nitrate that the federal government had been moving through commercial channels since the end of the war. The substance had been used as an explosive component in wartime munitions. Mixed with fuel oil, ammonium nitrate is a powerful and relatively cheap explosive. Sold as fertilizer, it was the same chemical in largely the same form, now routed through the civilian export market. The SS Grandcamp was a French cargo vessel chartered to transport a load of this material to France and Belgium. On the morning of April 16th, she was still taking on cargo, her hold loaded with approximately 2,300 tons of bagged ammonium nitrate. The bags themselves were paper sacks coated with a wax treatment meant to keep moisture out, a practical measure for a product being shipped across an ocean, but one that introduced a highly combustible material into immediate contact with a substance capable of catastrophic detonation under the right conditions. The fire that started in the hold sometime around 8:15 a.m. was, by all accounts, relatively small at first. A smoldering cargo fire of the type that dock workers encountered occasionally. The Grandcamp's captain made an unusual decision about how to fight it. Rather than flooding the hold with water, he ordered it sealed and filled with steam, hoping to smother the fire without damaging the cargo. The steam approach prevented water damage to the fertilizer. It also prevented the cooling effect that water would have provided. Inside the sealed hold, temperature continued to rise. By 9 o'clock, smoke was visible from a distance. The Texas City Fire Department responded. Spectators, some of them dock workers, and some of them simply curious, had gathered at a safe-seeming distance along the waterfront. The fire department was on scene, working the situation, believing they were dealing with a controllable cargo fire. At 9:12 a.m., the Grandcamp detonated. The explosion was among the largest non-nuclear detonations ever recorded in the United States. The blast wave traveled outward with enough force to knock aircraft from the sky. 2 small planes flying over the harbor at the time were destroyed by the concussion. A 40-foot wave swept across the harbor. Steel cargo fragments from the ship were hurled several miles, landing throughout the surrounding area. The Grandcamp herself simply ceased to exist as a recognizable structure. Every firefighter who had been working the scene at the moment of detonation was killed instantly. The Texas City Volunteer Fire Department lost effectively its entire active membership in a single second. 27 of the department's 28 members on duty that morning died. The fire that the first explosion ignited spread rapidly through the dock area, setting fire to oil storage tanks, chemical facilities, and the SS High Flyer moored nearby and also loaded with ammonium nitrate. Rescue workers and surviving dock personnel worked through the night of April 16th into April 17th, some of them attempting to tow the High Flyer out of the harbor before her cargo could also cook off. At 1:10 a.m. on April 17th, she detonated as well. The second explosion was smaller than the first, but struck an area already full of rescue workers and emergency personnel. It killed additional people who had survived the first blast and returned to help. Combined with the aftermath fires, chemical spills, and structural collapses that followed both detonations, the disaster stretched across 2 days and left 5 city blocks of the port area effectively destroyed. The official death toll settled at 581, confirmed dead, with an additional number of missing persons who were never definitively accounted for, bringing some estimates of total casualties higher. More than 5,000 people were injured. The economic destruction to Texas City's port infrastructure was severe enough to threaten the town's economic survival entirely. The legal battle that followed became one of the defining cases in American tort law. More than 8,000 individual plaintiffs joined in a class action suit against the United States government, arguing that federal negligence in the manufacture, packaging, labeling, and regulatory oversight of the ammonium nitrate was directly responsible for the disaster. Federal District Court Judge Thomas Connolly ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, awarding compensation across the class. The government appealed. The community of Texas City did not have the luxury of waiting for legal resolution. The disaster had killed the fire department, destroyed port infrastructure that was central to the local economy, and left thousands of families dealing with death and injury on a scale the small Texas city had never experienced. Federal disaster relief programs of the kind that exists today did not exist in 1947 in anything like their modern form. Texas City rebuilt largely through its own resources and through private charitable support. At the same time that its families were fighting a legal battle in federal court over whether the government that had manufactured the thing that killed their relatives could be held accountable at all. The Supreme Court's ruling in 1953 landed in a city that had been rebuilding for 6 years, in families that had been grieving for 6 years, carrying the compounded weight of loss and the slow-burning injustice of a legal system that had spent those same 6 years deciding whether their loss even qualified for remedy. The 6-3 vote was not close enough to suggest the question had been difficult. It was close enough to show it had been contested. The 3 dissenting justices found the majority's reasoning inadequate to the human reality of what had happened in Texas City. The majority prevailed. The case worked its way through the appellate courts and reached the Supreme Court in 1953. The central legal question was whether the Federal Tort Claims Act, a 1946 law that had opened the government to some lawsuits for the first time, allowed citizens to sue the government for harm caused by negligent policy decisions, or only for harm caused by individual government employees acting outside proper procedure. The court's majority held that the disaster resulted from a series of discretionary policy decisions: how to dispose of surplus ammonium nitrate, how to package it, how to classify it for shipping, and that such decisions were protected from judicial review. The government could not be held liable. The plaintiffs received nothing. The Ferris Doctrine, as the principle came to be known, has been applied in dozens of contexts since 1953, consistently shielding the federal government from liability in cases where courts find that the harm arose from a policy choice rather than an individual failure. Texas City was one of the foundational cases that established that doctrine. The Texas City Memorial Cemetery contains the graves of many of the disaster's unclaimed and unidentified dead. A memorial at the port site marks the location of the original pier. Texas City itself recovered and rebuilt over the following decades. The families of the 581 dead never received compensation from the only entity the courts found held meaningful responsibility for what happened. Texas City rebuilt the dock area that had been destroyed and continued as a port city through the following decades. The memory of April 16th, 1947 was kept alive primarily by survivor organizations and local historians in a community that had every reason to want to remember what had been asked of it and what it had never been given in return. A memorial park and museum in Texas City now documents the disaster and the lives of the dead, a local act of collective memory for a national catastrophe that the Supreme Court had ruled was nobody's legal responsibility. If you want to understand the disasters where the law was specifically designed to ensure the powerful would never pay, and where the system worked exactly as intended, subscribe. Every week, a story that was hidden in plain sight.